Good evening and welcome to the 51st Annual Delaware Teacher of the Year Award Ceremony. This year's competition was open to the 19 public school districts and all charter schools to submit their best and brightest teachers to see who will be Delaware's Teacher of the Year. Their qualifications, classroom instruction, and their message, if chosen National Teacher of the Year, have been reviewed by our distinguished panel of judges. Tonight, one of these individuals will be Delaware's representative for National Teacher of the Year. But first, let's take a few minutes and get to know a little about each candidate. From the Caesar Rodney School District, Megan Zabo.
I am the teacher I am today because of my mom and dad. They have 61 years of teaching experience between the two of them when they retired back in the early 2000s. And growing up, they were just the best role models for me as far as what good teachers do and the impact that they have on students' lives. But more importantly, I feel like they saw in me the things that make a good teacher before I saw it in myself. Because I didn't always want to be a teacher growing up. I actually really wanted to be a professional tap dancer. Mainly a Radio City Music Hall Rockette was my goal. But as I got older and I realized I needed a plan B, I had always been a big science nerd and I kind of felt like I wanted a profession that helped people. So I entered college as a biology major with the hopes of maybe going to medical school. But it didn't feel quite right to me. And I have my mother in my ear constantly saying things like, you should really look into education classes. I think you would be such a great teacher. You have that spark about you. And right at that same time, my father invited me to go observe his classroom. And when I saw him delivering that lesson that day, I just realized that teaching itself is a performance. And that day, I went home and I changed my major and never looked back. And I really feel like I owe it all to my mom and dad.
I couldn't wait to get to science class to see what we would be learning next, says a former student. From Capital School District, Jennifer Heffernan.
I became a teacher because I was looking for a career that was equal parts rewarding and challenging. One that changes day to day, particularly when you're working with middle school children. You don't know what's walking through the class. But I find it's a great way. I get to work with the children of today and help shape our future for tomorrow. And the slogan we have in our classrooms, we know a parked car goes nowhere. So we have to get it in gear and go, and I get to say, I'm along for the front seat of that ride. And it's very rewarding at times. We hit our speed bumps, we get through the problem, we math on. But at the end, just to see the growth of students, to see the maturity by the end and head them off to high school, I'd say that's a motivating factor and a big reason why I chose to be a teacher.
She truly cares about her students, comes up with creative activities to enhance her lessons, and offers resources to help her students excel. Pamela Hobbs from the Lake Forest School District.
I actually think the teaching career was almost chosen for me. My mother worked in various areas of educational support all throughout her life, and so I was very fortunate to have a lot of well-respected and excellent educators throughout my family, friends, as well as my church family. And they all saw something in me, too many of them for it to be a coincidence. Perhaps through my work with the youth group or teaching Sunday school, and they said that I would make a great teacher. Eventually, I came to believe it myself. These were well-respected, excellent educators, and for them to put their confidence in me meant a lot. But it honestly wasn't until I did my student teaching experience 23 years ago. I honestly could not wait to get out of bed in the morning and go to that classroom. This was a job I wasn't even being paid for. That's when I knew that the career that had been chosen for me, I had now chosen for myself. And I saw it as something that I had a God-given talent for, and to have a God-given talent for something that is so important, it's just an awesome, awesome feeling.
For Pam, teaching is not something that she's working to do as much as it is a natural result from sharing herself with others. From Milford School District, Judith Woods.
It's really surprising that I ever became a teacher because I hated school as a kid. I was a very earnest, scholarly little girl, and this contrived to paint a kick-me sign that hung on my back, so I was a target for bullies. By the time I got to high school, I'd stopped going to school mid-year. And I hated the way science was taught, even though I loved science, because we either read out of textbooks and answered questions, or they just gave us equipment and said, go ahead, and you feared for life and limb. By the time I got to high school, I said, I'm done with this, and I transferred to a private school. I went to Providence Friends School, and they allowed me to really blossom as an individual. They were wonderful teachers. They treated the kids like human beings. And eventually, when I began to teach, I vowed that I would never teach the way I was taught in my first 11 years of school, and I would never allow kids to be bullied. And to me, it's a mission that I've realized.
She works hard to develop positive relationships with all students, where she demonstrates compassion and understanding. Elise Starr from Polytech School District.
The other teacher that influenced me the most, we called him Ike. His name was Mr. Eisenhower, and I had him for AP Calculus. And being an English teacher, math and science are not my strong suit, so I struggled a lot in that class. And he worked with me. He had study sessions at his house. It was a different time then, so we could all kind of collect at his house and he could tutor us. And he also would spend time with me during my senior honor hall every day to help me get the concepts. And I know that when he sat with me, sometimes he would be there and I could do it and he would walk away and I would have no idea how to do the problem. But he always encouraged me, he never got frustrated with me, and he was always willing to give his time. And I try to do that for my students as well. And the last teacher was a professor I had in college. His name was Dr. Ralph Cohen, and he was my Shakespeare teacher, and he could recite any line from any Shakespeare play on demand. And sometimes he seemed to bounce around the room. His energy was just contagious. And I was always excited for this Shakespeare class that had always kind of bored me in the past. So I try to keep that energy and enthusiasm that he had in my classroom.
Mrs. Starr is a dynamic teacher who brings English language arts alive for her students. From the Smyrna School District, Ryan Buchanan.
The most memorable moments in my classroom really have one thing in common, and that's where I help students to take themselves to the next level, make them achieve things that they didn't even think they were capable of. And that can be from the lowest levels, just getting a kid to show up at school and graduate, which they didn't think they could do, and at the highest level, getting kids into a college they thought was beyond their ability. So ultimately, getting kids to achieve more than they thought they could is probably the greatest success I have in the classroom. Growing up, my mother was a teacher, so I was surrounded by that. She was an elementary school teacher, so even as a young age, I spent a lot of time in her classroom. And when I got to high school, I spent some time tutoring kids and reading and things like that. And I got some chance to coach some kids in sports, and I really developed that as an interest. So then when I went to college and I was able to tie teaching with my love of literature, since then, teaching's always just been very rewarding for me.
He has strong family values and is an excellent role model for students and staff. Lisa Spedden, Appoquinimink School District.
One thing that makes me different than everybody else is that I refuse to pass out a textbook. I refuse to go number by number, page by page, and become a sit and get teacher. I refuse to use memorization as a tool to help my kids find mastery. I want real, relevant material for them that makes them want to dive into the curriculum, makes them want to learn, and wants them to come to my classroom every day. For that hour, everything else is tuned out. And the only hour that matters is what they're doing right there and right now. I want them to bring in their iPhones and their smartphones. I want to look at how much storage space they have compared to how much memory is left on there. I want them to size that up as a fraction, as a percentage. I want to take their favorite TV show, maybe it's the OCC, Orange County Choppers, and they have to size a pipe to fit a motorcycle or a chopper and cut a fraction up and get it wrong, and that they're helping them solve that problem and redoing it. I want to take them and close their eyes and listen to the weather report and figure out that the integers are traveling in positive and negative directions and the temperature is changing. I want them to realize that math is all around them and it's anything and everything that they can think of and do. That it's not a textbook problem, but it's about them and it's their real world, and I want to bring it to them. And that's what I do in my classroom every day.
Lisa is constantly challenging herself, her students, her peers, and the administrators to think differently and think bigger. Brandywine School District's Thomas Dean.
When I started in college, when I first went to Westchester State College back when it was a state college, I had no intention of being a teacher whatsoever. In fact, I probably wasn't the best student all through my career. I was going to be a musician. I was going to end up on the stage at Carnegie Hall one of these days. That's what I was going to do with my life. Then I took an educational psychology class. It was required. I went in, a little skeptical of everything. When I finished the class, or even really partway through it, I knew that the teaching was what I was going to be. It was a moment of enlightenment. It really did change my life. The understanding that I could have that dramatic of an effect on our future generations, that I could actually make a difference in this world. And the only way I could do it, I wasn't going to do it through playing a piano at Carnegie Hall, but I was going to do it by teaching. And I've never looked back.
Mr. Dean does not work or serve for awards or accolades, but simply to inspire and impact all those he comes in contact with every day. Jamette L. Garlick, Christina School District.
Actually, it was my mother. Growing up when I was young, I wanted to be a teacher. But when I got to high school, I decided I did not want to be like my mother. And when I went to college, I went to school for accounting because I wanted to go into business. And I worked in a bank for about 8 years. And one day I was sitting at my desk and I said, I don't think I can do this for the next 30 years. This job is not very meaningful. It was fun, but not meaningful. And I kind of thought about all the things my mom did, the fun she had with her kids, and how they all came back, how many of them came back, and she always saw somebody she knew when she was teaching her kids she was teaching grandkids and kids and all those generations. And I was like, you know what? I really should have been a teacher like my mom. So I talked to my husband and we kind of agreed, and I went back to school, and I became a teacher, and I thank God I did because that's the best decision I ever made. I love my job, and I'll always say if we hit the Powerball, I will keep teaching and just get a personal assistant, but that's how I became a teacher.
A parent says Miss Garlick inspired both of my boys to perform to their highest potential and to be excellent members of the classroom community. Leanne Skipper from Colonial School District.
I had one experience in my classroom where I was trying to explain to my students, we were doing a lesson on Dr. Martin Luther King, and I was trying to explain to them differences and how it's okay to be different, to have different colored skin, different colored hair, different colored eyes, and they weren't quite getting it. So I had a student who had just gotten a new pair of shoes, so I had all of us stick our feet out in a big circle and we all looked at our shoes. We talked about how everyone's shoes were different, but aren't they still pretty cool? Isn't it cool to have different things and look different than everyone else? We talked about how my shoes may have had maybe been white with some blue laces, and another student had red shoes with yellow laces, and they were different, but it was still okay to be different. And later on that day, we were walking in the hallway, and one of my students pointed to someone and said, "He has black shoes and green laces, but that's okay, he's different than me." And they got that part of it. So then as the week went on, we tried to correlate going back to the sneaker activity to talking about differences in skin and why it's so important that even though we're different, we're still all the same, and the importance of accepting each other for the differences in who they are. So it was a fun lesson.
Mrs. Skipper believes that each student should have the opportunity to learn and achieve in the manner most appropriately meeting their individual and unique needs. Susan Moyer, Newcastle County, Votech School District.
My teaching philosophy actually aligns with our district motto, which is real learning for real life. And what I try to do is make a connection between what I teach in the classroom and how it pertains to real life. And I do this usually by having guest speakers, field trips, projects, things like that. I have a guest speaker come in each year when we talk about infection control, because I teach in the nursing technology area, so infection control is huge for healthcare. And she gives a lot of information about products and what hospitals use. But one fact that she gave to the students was that there's a hospital in Maryland that actually, if you get called 3 times not washing your hands correctly, they will fire you. So the students are all like, oh, and I'm like, look, this is the real deal. I'm not teaching you, how to wash your hands just so you get an A and then you go home and do it however you want. This is important. Every year I take my students on a field trip to University of Maryland Hospital Shock Trauma, so they get to see a real hospital environment. I show them a film from the hospital ahead of time, so they kind of have an idea of what goes on there. But we tour through the triage area. We go up on the helipad where the helicopter lands. They have guest speakers like a pharmacist, speech therapist, physical therapist. So they really get to see everything in action. And I think that excites them, for their future, which is coming up for colleges and careers and things like that.
What gives the edge to Mrs. Moyer over many other exemplary teachers is the extensive experience she brings into the classroom from her work in the healthcare industry. From the Red Clay Consolidated School District, Tami Soltow.
I would say that there are a number of different individuals who influenced me to become a teacher. I remember back in 8th grade, well actually it wasn't so long ago, but in 8th grade I had a science teacher, Mr. DeMuro, and I had broken my arm and I was in a cast, and the boy next to me, I just thought he was so cute, so I allowed him to cheat off of me and write answers on the cast. And they would always ask me for the answers, and I would always give them to him because I was really good at science. It turns out, though, that in 8th grade, a lot of girls especially drop down in science because they don't want to be seen as geeks. They don't want to be, that smart girl. So my grades started to slip, and Mr. DeMuro noticed that the group, my lab partners, were cheating off of me. And he came up to me and basically just said, Tami, what are you doing? This boy's not cute. Why are you allowing people to cheat off of you? You're smart, be yourself. Instead of allowing them to cheat off you, you can teach them it. You know it. So I would. They would ask me questions and I would help them, and I thought, my gosh, I can do this. I could be just like Mr. DeMuro. So later in life, I actually changed careers. I became an attorney for a number of years. And I remember sitting in my law office getting an email from one of my former students. And she said, guess what, Miss Soltow, well, Miss Tallman at the time, I'm a science teacher too. I graduated, I teach science, thank you so much, you're the one who inspired me. And I had to write back to her how wonderful it was to hear that, but I wasn't a teacher anymore. And she wrote back and she was like, I said to her, I said, I will give you my things, I'll give you my old posters, I'll give you my resources. And she said, no, I hope one day, something like, I hope one day you teach again. And so I went downstairs, talked to my law partner, and I said, I think I'm going to go back to teaching. And those influences really basically shaped where I am today.
She was one of the first teachers to instruct students using our distance learning lab. Her patience with this new technology was an enormous help to her colleagues and students. Cathie Kennedy, the Charter School of Wilmington.
I think that as a teacher, and especially as a world language teacher, what I try to create in the classroom is an inclusive, culturally diverse environment. One in which each student has a place, and one in which students are able to communicate with each other in the target language, can also make comparisons with their own culture, their own culture, and that of the target language, and can maybe even, in a sense, create communities. And probably the most important is the idea of creating these connections, the connections with each other, and also connections with other disciplines. How can French relate to history? How can it relate to math? And so that's my goal when I go into the classroom.
A former student says, although I did not realize it at the time, Madame Kennedy is the reason why I excelled in French in high school, became a rabid Francophile, and decided to major in French in college. From the Cape Henlopen School District, Stephanie Shuttleworth.
Back when I was in high school, we had a special education classroom, but it was down in the basement. And somewhere between my 10th and 11th grade year, that classroom was moved and relocated upstairs by the office. And when it was in the basement, we didn't really know what was going on in there. We were all a little curious. We would walk by to go to the cafeteria for lunch, and we'd see kids in there, but the door was always closed. You could just see through the window, and you never saw those kids. Well, when they moved the school, or when they moved the classroom upstairs, I was able to peek in a little bit, and one day I was walking by and I caught the eye of a little girl who was in there, and she looked really friendly, and so I asked if I could go in and help out sometimes, once I figured out what was going on. And that's what I did. So I took my study hall periods and free time, lunchtime, and I went in and I played games and helped them to learn. And then I decided that's what I wanted to do. So now I'm a special ed teacher.
A little bit simpler, a little bit easier for you to understand. Okay, this story is called the U.S. Constitution.
The students assigned to Mrs. Shuttleworth's classroom had many unique needs that required a dedicated and compassionate teacher. Judy Mills, Delmar School District.
Having been a student at the school where I currently teach, I must give credit to two former Delmar school teachers for my career decision to become a teacher. My 7th grade math teacher and my high school English teacher provided stability by reaching out to me during a very difficult season in my life. They encouraged me academically and gave me a safe place to learn. And therefore, when it came time to choose my career path, I could think of none more rewarding than affecting the lives of young people and instilling a love of learning, as my teachers had done for me. My most memorable moments in my classroom are centered around collaborative problem solving done by students. As I see students justify their reasoning, persevere to check for accuracy, or reach out to struggling classmates, that's where I find my true reward. As I enable students to develop their mathematical voices and find their unique differences, that is my greatest joy in teaching. Giving them choice in how they are assessed, allowing them freedom to choose different formats for projects, whether it be books, songs, and anything they can come up with to demonstrate their mathematical knowledge, that's truly rewarding for me as I see them take ownership of their own learning.
An exceptional teacher inspires hope, ignites the imagination, and instills a love of learning. That is what Mrs. Mills does each and every day.
Environments work, but there's a specific social studies term I'm looking for in there. Devin?
From the Indian River School District, Clarissa M. Stevenson.
I became a teacher to give students the gift of opportunity, to open doors. I know from my personal experiences that education can open or give you chances that weren't necessarily there to begin with. You know, people debate, is the American dream still alive? And I think that education is an important element in that. It never ceases to amaze me how education can take someone off a path that they seem predestined to take and completely change the course of their lives. Not only their lives, but that of their family, their community, and their future families. Education just has an unmatched power to make positive change, and I wanted to be a part of that.
She models teaching of the highest caliber and thus sets a standard to which peers aspire. Rawlings, Laurel School District.
My most memorable moment while teaching has been when I had to teach a PLC lesson. I had all 4 classes, half of our kindergarten grade, and we were learning about germs. We had previously learned a lesson that day about germs and hand washing and how to keep ourselves healthy and strong and all those lovely things. And I had them all up and moving and singing, of course, and we were singing a song about how we wash our hands, and the kids just, by singing and moving and dancing, all 100+ kids were able to still be under control and to have fun and to learn, and it was a really spectacular moment, and they really remembered the lesson. It was fantastic.
A kindergarten student says, Mrs. Rawlings is very nice. She teaches us to eat healthy food, play, and exercise. Her crafts are fun too. From the Seaford School District, Kara Kirby.
Last year, we had what's called a community meeting in our class. It's a chance for us to get to know the students. It's a chance for the students to get to know us. And one of the topics we discussed was, what do we want to be when we grow up? And of course the students said, "What did you want to be, Mrs. Kirby?" And I said, "Well, to be honest, I actually did not want to originally be a teacher when I grew up. My first choice was to be a meteorologist, but I could not stand the fact that everybody was always mad at the meteorologist. The weather could never please everybody at one time. It's either raining when they want it to be sunny, or it's sunny when they wanted rain. So you could never please, everybody. So I decided I don't think that would be a really good profession for me. One of my kids piped up and said, "Mrs. Kirby, I'm really glad you chose not to be a meteorologist because you're a really good teacher and I'm glad you're my teacher." So that was kind of affirmation for me that I had made the right choice.
A colleague says, she is creative in implementing lessons and activities for her students. She is reliable, supportive, and very professional at all times. Carolyn Mall, Sussex Technical School District.
I never wanted to be a teacher. I couldn't imagine being trapped in a building with hormonal teenagers all day, about 20 minutes to give yourself indigestion, gobbling down your lunch, have people knocking on your doors, emails dinging, phones ringing, and the pressure from having to get back to all of these people within those 20 minutes. I walked in my first day and I was still thinking that. Why have I taken this job? Was never going to do it. I had worked for a number of years being an athletic trainer, being able to, at the collegiate setting, being able to be outside, to be in a training room, breathing fresh air a part of the day, and then I was inside. I had stepped away from that career and a friend of mine knocked on my door. This position was open, said, "Come give it a try." I said, "Okay, I'll come give it a try." So I went in there and I started doing my thing. And again, it took a couple of years, but now I love it and I'll keep doing it forever.
She is a rock star, a warrior, a trailblazer, and exactly the kind of innovative and naturally gifted teacher who energizes and galvanizes an entire school. From Woodbridge School District, James Wheatley.
I'd say that my general teaching strategy is to establish a relationship with the students that really cultivates learning. So it's not just becoming a teacher, it's becoming a very key facilitator. You have to balance that line where you're not friends with them, but you're also not just some sort of lecturer. They start to realize that you care about their success, and you balance that line. And it's very hard to balance that line, but when you do, and the kids start to see that, you start having that community of learners that I was talking about, where they just feed off of one another, and success is now a cool thing. And that's where I think one of my teaching strategies, it's hard to put it into words, but it's that relationship with your students that you got to show that you really care, and if you don't, it won't come out. So.
A former student says, "Mr. Wheatley is the sole reason that I received a score of 5 on the Advanced Placement Calculus test." Ladies and gentlemen, these are your 20 candidates for Delaware's Teacher of the Year.